Hey, welcome to Performance Vacuums, Colorado's premier central vacuum installer and central vacuum experts. We want to showcase our installation style and proficiency with central vacuums, so sit back, enjoy. We're going to go into detail how we install central vacuums here in Denver, Colorado. Built-in, centrally located vacuums, as the name implies, are vacuum cleaners built into your structure, like a hot water heater or any other appliance. There are a lot of advantages to doing this. First, they're the most technologically advanced vacuum cleaner out there. Second, they're more powerful. They have their own dedicated circuit. Third, maneuverability and convenience. These are a lot more maneuverable. And fourth is air quality, because all the air is vented outside the living space. These have the best air quality of any vacuum cleaner out there. Now, first I want to address a common myth. A lot of people think that central vacuums can only be installed in new structures. Why that is the ideal time to install them. They're quite easy to retrofit into most structures, especially if they're up to code. This video right here is of a retrofit, and you'll see a lot more of that as we go on into this video. So let's talk about air quality. With a portable vacuum, the air is going in and then out of the vacuum cleaner into the living space. With a central vacuum, the air is actually being sucked through pipe into the collection unit with the motor, and then out of the living space. So it's going to be in the garage or utility room, and then a lot of times it's vented straight out the house. So you're not actually putting any of that dust back into the room, which makes a big difference, especially if you have allergy sufferers. Now let's talk about noise. Because the motor is out of the room, really all you hear is the air whoosh. I'm also going to play for you a clip I took on site during a retrofit to show what it actually sounds like when one of these things is running. So let's play that now. That was pretty darn quiet. Now let's contrast that with the portable vacuum, and I did a whole video on the sound of portable vacuums, so here's a clip from that, particularly a Dyson. Now this is using the same microphone at the same distance, so keep that in mind. Headphone warning.
Dyson and try.
As you can hear, that's a drastic difference. Let's give the central vacuum one more listen. Now that's inside the living space. Let's go outside the living space into a garage where I did a retrofit, and you'll get to hear what one sounds like when you're standing right next to it. It is quite a bit louder. So I guess it's time to talk about what the hell it was we just watched. That was a hose retracting into a raceway. And what happens is, when you're done with the central vacuum, the hose goes back into the wall on a modern installation. That one was in the garage. Here's one upstairs in a house. And the story will just repeat itself no matter where we are with the central vacuum, is that the hose can be up to 60 feet retracting into that raceway, which means basically you have one hose per 2,000 square feet when they're placed properly. So typically you have one of those hoses per floor. It's a really big house, you might have 2 or 3 per floor, but it's pretty convenient to just pull that hose out of the wall. Alright, let's talk about some of the other conveniences, like the fact you're not having to haul a whole vacuum cleaner around. You're only having to carry the attachments and the hose. And the hose is extremely lightweight, so you're only dealing with like 2 to 4 pounds versus having to deal with even what a lightweight vacuum cleaner would be, 8 pounds. So it's far more convenient and far more maneuverable. And a lot of people like to say, oh, a stick vac sounds easier. Well, yeah, cordless stick vac is cordless, but then you're carrying around a motor that's like 5 to 10 pounds. So again, you still have something that's far more convenient than anything else on the market. Next, I really want to just talk real quick about central vacuum accessories, and really because they're 1.25 inches, the world is your oyster in terms of what you want. It's a buffet in terms of accessories. But generally, I recommend VisaWork for accessories. Sibo and Lindhouse accessories, also known as the MD Stealth, are very good. Make sure you have some. One for each floor is typically what I like to do. The other thing that's available is there is now a remote control handle for your central vacuum that doesn't require batteries. So definitely ask your installer about that. That's a VacuFlow product. Then there's the unmatched performance and power. Because this is something you don't have to carry, the motor can be any size and shape, meaning a lot of these have more than one motor. Some of them have like 3 fans. Some of them the motor is as big as a portable vacuum by itself. So you have what looks like a trash can basically on your wall in your garage, and in there you have a motor, and then that runs off a dedicated circuit, either 110 volts or 220. Again, because you're not carrying it around, it doesn't need to be plugged in. The possibilities are endless, and it just leaves the engineers to design what works the best. Speaking of power and performance, these units are sized to the house. You have a 2,000 square foot house, you're buying a different power unit than if you have a 5,000 square foot house or if you have a 10,000 square foot house. Other thing is sizing these things, you have to consider what it's running. Most of these units are sized at sea level to an old school installation. So when we start talking about modern retractable hoses, and then if you add altitude, these things are 40% less at altitude than they are at sea level. So they have to be sized properly, and that's where your local expert will come in. You don't just buy any one off the internet and slap it in your walls. It doesn't really work that way. You need one that's proper to your size house, the amount of retractable hoses, or the amount of valves you have, and how it's intended to be used. And that sort of thing takes years of experience for a lot of people to grasp and understand, to even size one of these properly to their house. There are some people who have bought builder's grade houses and they weren't sized properly, and a lot of those people are like, oh, my central vacuum's weak. Well, that's because you have the wrong one for your size house. The central vacuum was put in by a builder who had no idea what they were doing. They said, oh, it's a 5,000 square foot house, this unit's rated to 5,000 square feet, and then it's at altitude, or it's got some weird bends in it or something. So it really are installer specific in terms of the experience you're going to get. And there are a lot of people, and I'm going to put a link below to notable people who know how to install it and how to find one of those people in your area. Now, the other way we install these is through retrofitting. And retrofitting is actually pretty easy as well in most houses. So the power unit we already know is going to need a dedicated circuit, so that's going to go next to the circuit breaker box, whether that's in the garage or the utility room. Most houses have an attic, a crawl space, or an unfinished basement where this can go. So most houses, you can just use those spaces, put the piping in afterwards. And it's usually a 1 to 2 day process to do that. Now, if you have like a brick house or a 100-year-old adobe house, that's going to be a little bit different because it's not a modern house that's up to modern code. But in most houses with normal drywall and studs, you can really add one of these quite easily. And the only hole in the wall you're making is for the valve itself. So you're not tearing anything out or anything crazy like that. So it's rather non-invasive to install. Now let's go over types of installation. I have primarily talked about a retractable hose installation under ideal circumstances. Now sometimes when we're installing one of these, we do what's called a hybrid install, meaning in the main area or areas of the house, we put one of those retractable hose valves. And then in an area that we use less often, like a basement, a storage area, we pull the hose out of the wall and then we plug it in to a port. And this is called a hybrid installation. And the reason for doing this is to have reach in other parts of the house that you don't use as often, but still be able to use retractable hose in most of the house. So this is the way to install one of these if you're trying to save a little bit of money, or you just don't use that space in your house. The next thing that's often done is you install conveniences, which means a retractable hose in the garage for cleaning out the car, one of the most popular things. You put what's called a vroom or a spot in a laundry room or utility room for you to get, quick messes, stuff like that. And then the next one is really popular is under the sink. A lot of times somebody wants to do a quick pickup in the kitchen. Our kitchens get dirty. So if you don't have one of the chameleon or hide-a-hose valves by the kitchen, you can put one in the cabinet, which is very popular. A quick tip about best practices. We talked about motor sizing. We talked about how they're installed. Now let's talk about some things that some installers still do, or some people think that still goes on. I think the number one thing is a dustpan. This was something left over from the 80s, where the idea was that you would turn the central vacuum on and you'd sweep up with a broom dust into the system. While yes, that's going to pull the dust into the system, it's also going to stir up a lot of dust. Brooms are archaic and barbaric, and they stir up a lot of dust. There's no real reason to do that. The modern vroom that goes under the kitchen cabinet has a set of tools beside it to come out with it, so there's really no reason for that dustpan installation. And if an installer suggests one of those vac pans, I would go ahead and either correct them or consider your other contractor options, as it's just not a best practice for 2024. The next thing I see are traditional valves. And traditional valves really don't make any sense in 2024, and I'm going to tell you why. A couple of things. First, you're carrying a hose that weighs twice as much as the retractable hoses, and that hose has two voltages running in it. It has a high voltage and a low voltage. So there's a lot more to go wrong in the system with this hose, and you have to plug it in, which again doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It kind of takes the convenient factor out of it. Now on top of it, it's more expensive to do, because if it's done properly, you then have to have an electrician run that high voltage. Now, if it's a really bad installer or somebody just trying to make a quick buck, and you see low voltage guys, and again, contractors who are just doing a builder grade thing, what they'll do is they'll get one with a pigtail, which means you put the central vacuum piping in, and then you have a pigtail that's like 6 foot from that hose. So you have to plug the hose in, then you have to plug in a separate plug to your nearest outlet. And a lot of times there's not an outlet nearby. I've seen all sorts of installations when doing service calls that are like this, and it's just the worst, and defeats the purpose of a central vacuum in the first place. Well, I hope this has showed the best practices we do here at Performance Vacuums. If you'd like to know more about our company or getting a central vacuum installed, our information will be in the description box below. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day.